Star Across the Tracks by Bess Aldrich. Mr. Harm Kurtz sat in the kitchen with his feet in the oven and discussed the world. That is to say, his own small world. His audience, shifting back and forth between the pantry and the kitchen sink, caused the orator's voice to rise and fall with its coming and going. The audience was Mama. She was the bell upon which the clapper of his verbal output always struck. As she never stopped moving about at her housework during these nightly discourses, one might have said facetiously that she was his roaming forum. Pa Kurtz was slight and wiry, all muscle and bounce. His wife had avoirdupois to spare, and her leisurely walk was what is known in common parlance as a waddle. She wore her hair combed high, brushed tightly up at the back and sides, where it ended in a hard knot on top of her head. When movie stars and cafe society took it up, Mama said she had beat them to it by 35 years. The Kurtzes lived in a little brown house on Mill Street, which meandered its unpaved way along a creek bed. The town, having been laid out by the founding fathers on this once flowing but now long-dried creek, was called River City. For 3 days of his working week, Pa's narrow world held sundry tasks: plowing gardens, cutting alfalfa, hauling lumber from the mill. For the other 3 days, he was engaged permanently as a handyman by the families of Scott, Dillingham, and Porter, who lived on Highview Drive, far away from Mill Street, geographically, economically, socially. And what Mama hadn't learned about the Scott, Dillingham, and Porter domestic establishments in the last few years wasn't worth knowing. Early in his labors for the 3 families, Pa had summed them up to Mama in one sweeping statement.
The Scotts, him I like, and her I don't like. The Dillinghams, her I like, and him I don't. The Porters, both I don't like.
The Porters' house was brick colonial. The Scottses was a rambling stone of the ranch type. The Dillinghams had no classification, but was both brick and stone, to say nothing of stained shingles, lumber, tile, glass bricks, and stucco. The Porters had 4 children of school age. Also they had long curving rows of evergreens in which the grackles settled with rapacious glee as though to outvie the family's noise. The grackles, and for all Pa knew, maybe the young folks also, drove Mrs. Porter wild, but Pa rather liked the birds. They sounded so country-like, and he had never grown away from the farm. Mr. Porter was a lawyer and a councilman. Mrs. Porter was a member of the garden club and knew practically all there was to know about flora and fauna. She went in for formal beds of flowers, rectangles and half-moons, containing tulips and daffodils in the spring, and dahlias and asters later. She ruled Pa with iron efficiency. With a wave of her hand, she might say, "Mr. Kurtz, I think I'll have the beds farther apart this year." And Pa, telling Mama about it at night, would sneer.
Just like they was the springs and mattress kind you can shove around on casters.
Mrs. Scott went to the other extreme. She knew the least about vegetation of anyone who had ever come under Pa's scrutiny. Assuredly, he was his own boss there. Every spring she tossed him several dozen packages of seeds, as though she dared him to do his worst. Once he had found rutabaga and spinach among the packages of zinnias and nasturtiums, but Pa couldn't be too hard on her, for she had a little cripple son who took most of her time. And he liked the fresh-colored packages every year and the feel of the warm, moist earth when he put in the seeds. The head of the house was a doctor, and if he happened to drive in while Pa was there, he stopped and joked a bit. The Dillingham's yard was Pa's favorite. The back of it was not only informal, it was woodsy. Mrs. Dillingham told Pa she had been raised on a farm. and that the end of the yard reminded her of the grove back of her old home. She had no children and often came out to stand around talking to Pa, or brought her gloves and worked with him. Poor thing, lonesome, Mamma said when he was telling her. Mrs. Dillingham had Pa set out wild crabapple and ferns and plum trees, little crooked ones, so it would look natural. Several times she had driven him out of the country, and they had brought back shooting stars and swamp candle, Dutchman's breeches, and wood violets. Pa's hand with the little wild flowers was as tender as the hand of God. When Mr. Dillingham came home from his big department store, he was loud and offacious. In winter, the work for the Highview homes was just as hard and far less interesting. Storm windows, snow on long driveways, basements to be cleaned. It was always good to get home and sit with his tired, wet feet in the oven and tell the day's experiences to Mamma. There was something very comforting about Mamma, her consoling, "Oh, think nothing of it," or her sympathetic clucking of, "Tisk, tisk." Them women, with their cars and their clubs. Tonight, there was more than usual to tell, for there had been great goings on up in Highview. Tomorrow night was Christmas Eve, and in preparation for the annual prizes given by the Federated Civic Clubs, his 3 families had gone in for elaborate outdoor decorations. There was unspoken rivalry among the 3 houses, too. Pa could sense it. Mrs. Porter had asked him offhandedly, as though it were a matter of extreme unconcern, what the other 2 families were planning to do, and Mr. Dillingham had asked the same thing, but bluntly. You couldn't catch Pa that way, though, he reminded Mamma with great glee.
Slippery as an eel.
Had just answered that the others seemed to be hitching up a lot of wiring. But Pa had known all along what each one was doing, and tomorrow night everybody would know. The Porters had long strings of blue lights, which they were carrying out into the evergreens, as though bluebirds, instead of black ones, were settling there to stay through Christmas. The Dillinghams had gone in for reindeer. They had ordered them made from plyboard at the mill, and tonight the 8 deer, with artificial snow all over them, were prancing up the porch steps, while a searchlight on the ground threw the group into relief. The Scotts, whose house was not so high as the others, had a fat Santa on the roof, with 1 foot in the chimney. In a nearby dormer window there was a phonograph, which would play Jingle Bells, so that the song seemingly came from the old fellow himself. It had made the little cripple boy laugh and clap his hands when they wheeled him outside to see the finished scene. All this and much more Pa was telling Mamma while she ambled about, getting supper on the table. Lily came home. Lily was the youngest of their 3 children, and she worked for the Dillinghams too, but in the department store. Lily was a whiz with a needle and a humble helper in the remodeling room. She made her own dresses at home and tried them on Macy, the mannequin. That was one of the store's moronic-looking models, which had lost an arm and sundry other features, and Lily had asked for it when she found they were going to discard it. Ernie, her brother, had brought it home in his car and repaired it. Now she hung her own skirts on Macy to get their length. That was about all the good the mannequin did her, for Lily's circumference was fully 3 times that of the model. The 3 of them sat down to eat, as Ernie would not arrive for a long time, and Mamma would warm things over for him. As usual, the table talk came largely from Pa. He had to tell it all over to Lily, the blue lights, the reindeer, the Santa with 1 foot in the chimney. Lily, who was a bit fed up with pasteboard reindeer and synthetic Santas at the store, thought she still would like to see them. So Pa said tomorrow night after Carrie got here, they would all drive to Highview, that he himself would like to see them once from the paved street, instead of with his head caught in an evergreen branch or getting a crick in his neck under a reindeer's belly. They discussed the coming of the older daughter and her husband, Bert, and the two little boys, who were driving here from their home in another county and planning on staying 2 whole nights. A big event was Christmas this year in the Mill Street Kurtz house. After supper, when Lily started the dishes, Pa went out to see the team, and Mama followed to pick out 2 of her fat hens for the Christmas dinner. In the dusk of the unusually mild December evening, Mama stood looking about her as with the eye of a stranger. Then she said she wished things had been in better shape before Carrie and Bert got here, that not one thing had been done around the place to fix it up since the last time. "That rickety old shed, Pa," she said mildly. "I remember as well as I'm standing here telling Carrie you was going to have that good new lumber on by the next time she come." It was as matched to pine shavings. It made Pa good and mad. With him working his head off day and night, he blew up. In anyone under 12, it would have been called a tantrum. He rushed over to the tool house and got his hammer and started to yank off a rotten board.
"I'll get this done before Carrie comes," he shouted, "if it's the last thing I do."
A psychoanalyst, after much probing, might have discovered what caused Pa's sudden anger. But Mama, who knew less than nothing about psychoanalysis, having only good common sense, also knew what caused it. Pa's own regrets over his big mistake made him irritable at times. He was one of those farmers who had turned their backs on old home places during the protracted drought. Mama had wanted to stick it out another year, but he had said no. They would move to town where everybody earned good money. So they had sold the farm and bought this little place on Mill Street, the only section of town where one could keep a cow and chickens. The very next year, crops were good again, and now the man who had bought the old place for so little came to River City in a car as fine as the Dillinghams. Yes, any casual criticism of the Mill Street place always touched him in a vital spot of his being. So he yanked and swore and jawed, more mad than ever that Mama had walked away and was not hearing him. It was not hard to get the old boards off. Soon they lay on the ground in a scattered heap of rotting timbers. Bird and Belle, from their exposed position across the manger, snatched at the alfalfa hay, quivered their nostrils, and looked disdainfully at proceedings. The cow chewed her cud in the loose-jawed way of cows and stared disinterestingly into space. Looking at the animals of which he was so fond, Pa admitted to himself he needn't have ripped the boards off until morning. But balmy weather was predicted all through Christmas, and Mama had made him pretty mad. Suddenly, the fire of his anger went out, for he was remembering something Ernie had said, and it tickled his fancy. The last time Carrie brought her little boys home, Ernie told them it was bubble gum the cow was chewing, and the kids had hung over the half-doored hour or more waiting for the big bubble to blow out. Tomorrow night, the little kids would be here, and the thought of it righted the world again. Mama came toward him with 2 hens under her arms, as though she wanted him to make up with her. But he fussed around among the boards, not wanting to seem pleasant too suddenly. His flashlight lay on the ground, highlighting the open shed, and the streetlight, too, shone in. An old hen flew squawking out of the hay, and the pigeons swooping down from the roof. Mama stood looking at it for quite a while. Then all at once she chucked the hens under a box and hurried into the house. When she came out, she held Maisie, the mannequin, in front of her, and Lily was close behind with her arms full of sheets.
"What do you think you're up to?"
Pa asked. "You let me be," Mama said pointedly. "I know what I'm doing." She set up the mannequin, and with deft touches, Lily draped the sheets over its body and head, and arranged it so it was leaning over the manger. Then Mama put Pa's flashlight down in the manger itself, and a faint light shone through the cracks of the old boards. "There," said Mama, stepping back. "Don't that look for all the world like the Bible story?"
"Seems like it's making light of it,"
Pa said critically.
The Scots and the Dillinghams didn't do nothing like that. They just used Santy Clauses.
I ain't doing it for show like them, Mama retorted. I'm doing it for Carrie's little boys. Something they can see for themselves when they drive in. Something they'll never forget. Like's not, as long as they live. Mama and Lily went out to the fence to survey their handiwork from that point. They were standing there when Ernie drove into the yard. Ernie worked for the River City Body and Fender Wreck Company, and one viewing the car and hearing its noisy approach would have questioned whether he ever patronized his own company. They were anxious to know what Ernie thought. There were the horses nuzzling the alfalfa, the cow chewing away placidly, and the pigeons on the ridgepole. And there was the white-robed figure bending over the faint glow in the manger. Ernie stood without words. Then he said, "For gosh sakes, what in time?" The words were crude, but the tone was reverent. "Mama did it for the kids," Lily said. "She wants to fix a star up over the stable. Mrs. Dillingham gave an old one to Pa." Ernie had been a fixer ever since he was a little boy. Not for his looks had the River City Body and Fender Wreck Company hired Ernie Kurtz. So after his warmed-over supper, he got his tools and a coil of wire and fixed the yellow bauble high over the stable, and the wire and the slim rod almost invisible, so that it seemed a star hung there by itself. All the next day, Pa worked up on High View Drive, and all day Mama cleaned the house, made donuts and cookies with green sugar on them, and dressed the fat hens, stuffing them to the bursting point with onion dressing. Almost before they knew it, Christmas Eve had arrived, and Carrie and Bert and the little two boys were driving into the yard with everyone hurrying out to greet them. "Why, Mama," Carrie said, "that old shed, it just gave me a turn when we drove in." But Mama was a bit disappointed over the little boys. The older one comprehended what it meant and was duly awestruck. But the younger one ran over to the manger and said, "What's she doing to blow out her bubble gum?" After they had taken in the wrapped presents and the mince pies Carrie had baked, Pa told them how they were all going to drive up to Highview and see the expensive decorations, stressing his own part in their preparations so much that Mama said, "Don't brag. A few others had something to do with it, you know." And Ernie sent them all into laughter when he called it Highbrow Drive. Then he went after his girl, Annie Hansen, and when they came back, surprisingly, her brother was with them, which sent Lily into a state of fluttering excitement. So they all started out in 2 cars, Ernie and his girl, and Lily in Ernie's one seat, with the brother in the back, his long legs dangling out. Carrie and Bert took their little boys and Mama and Pa. Not knowing the streets leading to the winging Highview section, Bert stayed close behind Ernie's car, which chugged its way ahead of them like a noisy tugboat. Everyone was hilariously happy. As for Pa, his anger about Mama's chidings was long forgotten. All 3 of his children home and the 2 little kids. The Dillinghams didn't have any children at all for Christmas fun.
We never lost a child,
He was thinking.
and the Porters lost that little girl. Our grandkids tough as trap, and the Scots got that cripple boy.
It gave him a light-hearted feeling of freedom from disaster. Now this nice sightseeing trip in Bert's good car, home to coffee and donuts, with the kids hanging up their stockings. Tomorrow the presents and a chicken dinner. For fleeting moments, Pa Kurtz had a warm little boy feeling of his own towards Christmas. Mama, too, said she hadn't had such a good time since Tyga was a pup. And when one of the little boys said he wanted to see Tyga when they got back, everyone laughed immoderately. They passed decorated houses and countless trees brightly lighted in windows. Then, around the curving streets of the Highview district, following Ernie's noisy lead so closely that Carrie said they were just like Mary's little lamb. Across the street from the Porter's colonial house, Ernie stopped, and they stopped too. The evergreens, with their sparkling blue lights, seemed a part of an enchanted forest. Carrie said she never saw anything so pretty in her life and waxed so enthusiastically that Pa reminded her again of his big part in it. When Ernie yelled back to ask if they'd seen enough, Pa waved him on, and around the curve they went to the Dillinghams. There were other cars in front of the houses. Pa said like as not the judges themselves were right now deciding the prizes, and by the tone of his voice, one would have thought the fate of the nation hung on the decision. At the Dillinghams, the little boys waxed more excited over the reindeer, lighted by the searchlight, which threw them into snow-white relief. Yes, Pa said, it was worth all the work they put on them. Then to Dr. Scott's, and here the little boys practically turned inside out. For Santa himself was up on the roof as plain as day, and more, he was singing, "Jingle bells, jingle bells." When he stopped, they clapped their hands and yelled up at him, "Hi, Santy, sing more!" And the adults all clapped too. Then Ernie signaled and the little procession swung down out of high view and circled into the part of town where the blocks were prosaically rectangular, and everything became smaller. Yards, houses, Christmas trees. "Look," Mama said happily. "Ain't it nice? There ain't no patent on it. Everyone can make merry. Every little house can have its own fun and tree, just the same as the big ones." Over the railroad tracks they went and into Mill Street, where Ernie adroitly picked his way around the mushy spots in the unpaved road, with Bert following his zigzag lead. And the trip was over. There were Bird and Belle and the cow. There were the pigeons huddled together on the stable roof. There were the White Mary and the light in the manger, and the star. The laughter died down. Everyone got out quietly. Carrie ran her arm through her mother's. "I like yours too, Mama." Inside, they grew merry again. Over the coffee and the donuts and sandwiches, there was a lot of talk. They argued noisily about the prize places for the decorated houses, betting one another which ones would win. Carrie and Lily both thought the lights in the trees were by far the most artistic. Ma and Ernie's girl were for the reindeer at the Dillinghams, but Lily's potential beau and Ernie and Bert and the little boys were all for the Scotts' Santa Claus. Pa, as one who had been the creator of them all, stayed benignly neutral. After a while, Ernie took his girl home. Her brother stood around on the porch a while with Lily and then left. The little boys hung up their stockings, with the grown folks teasing them, saying Santy could never find his way from the Scotts down from those winding streets. Papa and Ma kept their own bedroom. Lily took Carrie in with her. Bert went up to the attic with Ernie. Mama made the little boys a bed on the old couch, with 3 chairs in front to keep them from falling out. She had no sheets left for them, but plenty of clean patchwork quilts. In the morning, there were the sketchy breakfast and the presents, including a dishpan for Mama, who had never had a new one since her wedding day. The bit and braces Pa had wished for so long, a flowered comb and brush set for Lily, and a fully 1/3 of the things for which the little boys had wished. The children could play with their new toys and the men pitch horseshoes. But Mama and the girls had to hop right into the big dinner, for everyone would be starved. Ernie's girl and her brother were invited, too, and when they came, said they could smell that good dressing clear out in the yard. The hens practically popped open in the pans, and Mama's mashed potatoes and chicken gravy melted in the mouth. Oh, never did anyone have a nicer Christmas than the Kurtzes down on Mill Street. It was when they were finishing Carrie's thick mince pies that the radio news came on, and the announcement of the prizes. So they pulled back their chairs to listen, with the girls cautioning the men folks. Now stick to what your bet was last night and don't nobody cheat by changing. The announcer introduced the committee head, who gave a two-wordy talk about civic pride. Then, the prizes.
The third prize of $10 to Dr. Amos R. Scott, 1821 Highview Drive.
That was Santa in the chimney. And while Ernie and his group groaned their disappointment that it was only third, the others laughed at them for their poor bet.
The second, $25, Mr. Ramsey E. Porter, 1484 Highview Drive.
The blue lights! With Carrie and Lily wanting to know what the judges were thinking of, for Pete's sake, to give it only second. And Mama and Ernie's girl calling out jubilantly that it left only their own choice, the reindeer. Then, a strange thing happened. Listen, everybody.
Shh! What's he saying? The first prize, for its simplicity, for use in materials at hand without expense, for its sacred note, and the fact that it is the personification of the real Christmas story of which we sometimes lose sight. The first prize of $50 is unanimously awarded to Mr. Harm Kurtz at 623 Mill Street. A bomb would have torn fissures in the yard and made an unmendable shambles of the house. But it could not have been more devastating. For a long moment they sat stunned, mouths open, but without speech coming forth, and only the little boy saying, "He said you, Grandpa. He said you." Then the hypnotic spell broke, and Ernie let out a yell. $50, Pa! $50! And Mama, still dazed, kept repeating like some mournful raven, "But I just did it for the little boys." Several got up and dashed over to the window to see again this first prize paragon, but all they could see was Bird and Belle and the cow out in their little yard, an old dilapidated shed, and high up over it a piece of yellow glass. In the midst of the excitement, Pa practically turned pale, for it had come to him suddenly there was more to this than met the eye. What would the Scotts and the Porters and the Dillinghams say, especially Mr. Dillingham, whose expensive reindeer had won no prize at all? He was embarrassed and worried. The joy had gone out of winning the prize. The joy had gone out of the day. The girls had scarcely finished the dishes before the Mill Street neighbors started coming to have a share in the big news. The Danish Hansens came, and the Russian family from the next block, all three of the Czech families down the street, and the Negro children who lived near the mill. They were all alike to Mama. Just folks. She made coffee and gave everyone a donut. In fact, they ate so many that late in the afternoon she whipped up another batch. Also, out of honor to the great occasion, she combed her hair again in that high, skinned-up way and put on a second clean apron. 2 clean aprons in one day constituted the height of something or other. "Somebody might come by," she said by way of apology. "They'll get stuck in the mud if they do," said Ernie. "I'm the only one that knows them holes like a map."
Mama was right. Somebody came by. All River City came by. Soon after dusk, with the star lighted and the Bird and Belle back in the shed, the cars began to drive past in unending parade. Traffic was as thick as it had ever been up on Main and Washington. You could hear talk and laughter and maybe strong words about the mud holes. Then, in front of the yard, both the talk and the laughter would die down, and there would be only low-spoken words or silence. Bird and Belle pulling at the hay, the cow gazing moodily into space, the pigeons on the ridgepole in a long feathery group, White Mary bending over a faint glow in the manger, and overhead, the star. In silence, the cars would drive away and more come to take their places. 3 of them did not drive away. They swung in closer to the fence, and all the people got out and came into the yard. Of all things,
Mama, there come the Scotts and the Porters and the Dillinghams.
Pa was too excited for words and hardly knew what he was doing. But Mama was cool and went out to meet them. Shh, they're just folks, too. The Scotts were lifting the wheeled chair out of the car, which had been custom built for it. Dr. Scott wheeled the little boy up closer so he could see the animals. Carrie's little boys ran to him and, with the tactlessness of children, showed him how they could turn cartwheels all around his chair. "Why, Mr. Kurtz," Mrs. Porter was saying, "you're the sly one, helping us all the time and then copping out the prize yourself." Pa let it go. They would just have to believe it was all his doings, but for a fleeting moment he saw himself yanking madly at the shed boards. Mrs. Herr, I don't like Scott, said, "It's the sweetest thing I ever saw. It made me feel like crying when I saw it." Mrs. Dillingham said it made their decorations all look cheap and shoddy by the side of the manger scene. Even Mr. Dillingham, who had won no prize, said,
"Kurtz, you certainly deserve it."
Pa knew he couldn't take any more praise, at least not with Mama standing right there. So he said,
I guess it was Mama's idea. She's always getting ideas.
Right then, Mama had another one. "Will you all please to step inside and have a cup of coffee and a donut?" The women demurred, but all the men said they certainly would. So they crowded into the kitchen, mink coats and all, and stood about with coffee and donuts. And Lily got up her courage and said to Mr. Dillingham, "I don't suppose you know me, but I work for you."
"Oh, yes, sure I do,"
he said heartily, but Lily knew he was only being polite. "And this is a friend of mine," she added with a coy bravado, "Mr. Hanson." Mr. Dillingham said,
"How do you do, Mr. Hanson? Don't tell me you work for me, too." "Yes, sir, I do," said Lily's new beau. "Packing." And Highview and Mill Street both laughed over it. Mrs. Scott said, "Did you ever taste anything so good as these donuts? You couldn't find time to make me a batch once a week, could you?" So that Mrs. Dillingham and Mrs. Porter both said quickly, "Not unless she makes me one, too." And Mama, pleased as punch, but playing hard to catch, said maybe she could. Mr. Porter was saying to Ernie, "You folks ought to have some gravel down here on Mill Street." And Ernie, who wasn't afraid of anyone, not even a councilman, said with infinite sarcasm, "You're telling me?" The big cars all drove away. 3 or 4 others straggled by. Then no more. And Pa turned off the light of the star. The house was still again, except for the adenoidal breathing of one of the little boys. Even Ernie, coming in late, stopped tromping around upstairs. Everyone had to get up early to see Bert and Carrie off and get back to work. It made Pa worry over his inability to get sleep. This had been the most exciting day in years. Mama was lying quietly, her heavy body sagging down her side of the bed. It took all Pa's self-control to pretend to sleep. Twice he heard the old kitchen clock strike another hour. He would try it. "Mama,"
he called softly. "What?" she said instantly.
"Can't get to sleep.
"What's the matter?"
Keep thinking of everything. All that money coming to us. Company. Attention from so many folks. Children all home. Folks I work for all here and not a bit mad. You'd think I'd feel good. But I don't. Something hangs over me. Like they'd been somebody real out there in the shed all this time. Like we'd been leaving 'em stay out when we ought to have had 'em come in. Full notion. But keeps bothering me."
And then Mama gave her answer, comforting, too, just as he knew it would be. I got the same feeling. I guess people's been like that ever since it happened. Their conscience always hurting them a little. Because there wa'n't no room for him in the inn.